that have a rotary dial on it?
No, it's what you got with that joke gift, man.
Yeah, and it is live. We are live. As Matt Waldman is using something called a landline.
This is a joke gift that Gene Bramall gave me in lieu of me ranting about cell phones one year.
Yes, Matt Waldwell. That's for another episode. You know, Matt, that is for our conspiracy theory, the 178th edition of the Audible Conspiracy Theory Audibles, and just because you.
And
Sorry,
Chris Mortensen's joining us.
Right? Chris Mortensen's joining us. So what's no joke this morning?
Chris. Sorry.
Yeah, right. What do you got for us, Mort? What's no joke this morning is about 1 billion things to keep up with, okay? So let's go ahead and jump right in, and we got to use Dr. Gene's expertise here. This Carson Palmer stuff, I mean, it was just simmering, and then all of a sudden it boiled over. What's going to be the final result here if people are scrambling? You're thinking about Carson Palmer, you're thinking about Michael Floyd, you're thinking about Larry Fitzgerald, you're thinking about the Giants defense, you're thinking about Andre Ellington. What's up?
Well, and their NFL Network is just showing him walking in, and he's carrying a bag with his right arm, so that's at least reassuring. So what we've heard this morning, Adam Schefter said that sources he's talked to say that Palmer is 50-50 at best to play today. Ian Rappaport followed that up about an hour later, saying that he thought that Palmer was probably leaning toward playing, and that the trainers he talked to said that he hadn't been ruled out yet, and they're going to see how he throws in warm-ups. Bruce Arians told us on Friday that Carson Palmer has played in games where he's not practiced before, but when that happened last year, it was an elbow injury. It wasn't necessarily a nerve injury inside his shoulder or around his shoulder, for whatever that means. And I don't have any specifics about that. There's not been any information released to give us an idea of what that may mean. Darren Urban, just like Kent Summers, one of the better beat writers out there in Arizona, said in just the past 30 minutes that he thinks, as he thought on Friday, that they're still leaning towards starting Carson Palmer. So that's what's out there right now. And as I said, I don't know what the injury is. There's not enough information out there to say whether or not he's got a little bit of a stinger or a pinched nerve, some sort of herniated disc, does he have a pulled muscle there, something else going on, something is irritating one of the nerves. And when I hear nerve issue, I think about pain, I think about weakness, probably not numbness since they're considering him playing, but pain and weakness in that shoulder is something that they generally don't allow football players to play through. Now, it's just a little bit of a minor soft tissue thing. He had a little bit of nerve irritation, just like getting hit on the funny bone, something along those lines that's kind of irritating his shoulder. If that's the case, maybe they can get it calmed down since Friday, even though he's not thrown all week. They'll be able to throw well enough to impress him and let him play today. But there's just not enough information to know. I think the key thing here is if Palmer doesn't go, it's really hard to trust guys like Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Floyd, probably even Andre Ellington, because if the team gets behind, I don't know why they'd risk Andre Ellington if they're down 2 or 3 touchdowns at some point in the game. So it's just not enough information. I can't remember. I think this is an early game, is it not?
It is. It's in New York.
So we'll have a little bit more information here shortly.
Good question from Pierre Tippeth, Randall 1014. Is there potential damage that Palmer can do, like further damage he could do if he plays with this?
Yeah, I don't know. Without knowing specifically what the injury is, and again, this could be anything from a nerve to the neck all the way out to something going on with the shoulder specifically. Without knowing exactly what the injury is, it's hard to say yes or no. Any injury like this, when you're hearing about a nerve, you can answer yes to that question, but the degree to which the yes answer would be it's unfortunately just a little bit too hard for us to say.
Okay, so but you generally agree, and this is more of a football thing than an injury thing, that if we hear that Palmer is not going to play today, it really dampens, even against the Giants defense, that pass defense that looked pretty morose against Detroit on Monday night, it dampens the outlook. Matt, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly see that it would, but I mean, it's one of those deals where it's early. I don't know. You were talking Monday night's game you're talking about?
What I'm talking about is Arizona without Carson Palmer. Is it kind of like a red alert, get Michael Floyd out of your lineup, get Larry Johnson?
No, not necessarily. I don't think so, because when you're looking at this particular game, I mean, we're talking about what the Giants did last week. I mean, the Giants are looked like that they were 2 steps away from just folding up their tent and going home. I mean, this is.
I think that's an offensive issue, though, don't you? I mean, I think that defense, you can find a lot of good things about that defense, and everybody makes mistakes against Calvin Johnson. So you gotta like that front four. I think that secondary, from Roll to Mukamaro and some of those other guys, it's better than it's been. But I still think your point is valid. I'm not saying get all these guys out of your lineup, but I do think you have to consider dropping them a tier.
And I think that makes sense, dropping them a tier. But one thing that I would argue, even though the defense played all right, is this. You have to understand, if the offense is so bad that the defense is on the field, that even superstars or even just quality players get tired and they get demoralized because they're always out on the field. And the more chances that you give an offense to get it right, the more likely that they're going to get something right enough for that you're going to be able to get some points out of them. So that if you have some, Arizona Cardinals who you're looking at them versus some guys who are some, I would say borderline flex plays that you're thinking that would be, that you're trying to weigh the two, I would still probably go with some of your main Cardinals, because they are going to get targets, even if they're not the same quality targets as Carson Palmer might deliver.
What do you think of Drew Stanton in general? I mean, obviously we haven't seen him for a little while, but what do you think of Drew Stanton, Matt?
I think that, from what I've seen of him, is that, he's a decent athlete. He certainly has the arm to be able to get the job done. So if there's somebody wide open, he's going to find him. But he's also the type of guy that when pressure arrives, he can be induced into making some really bad mistakes. And I think that that's the thing that you have to be careful about with him. You may not get high-end numbers from him because he's not going to always make the right reads, and he's going to make some rash mistakes, but he should be able to, find guys well enough on a consistent basis that you'll get, that you should get number 3 numbers, from your wide receiver or from your running back.
And remember, of course, that he spent a year with Bruce Arians back in Indy. So, there's some history there. We'll see. It should be interesting. Gene, another one. And I got to say, I know Gene is a very modest guy. But when nobody else on Thursday night, when nobody else was saying anything definitive about Alshon Jeffrey, Gene was saying, he's not going to play. And now, Gene, we have Brandon Marshall, and we have Adam Schefter saying his source says 75% chance neither of them played. We have seen the Bears making some moves to indicate they're not convinced of the status of their starting wide receivers tonight against the Bears. Again, this implicates Jay Cutler. I wouldn't say it implicates Matt Forte. You're playing Matt Forte regardless, okay? It certainly maybe makes you less optimistic about him. But based on what we know, this is a Sunday night game, so we have Bears, 49ers, and then Monday night, Colts and Eagles players available to us if we find out during the late games this afternoon that Jeffrey and or Marshall are inactive. What is your outlook on this mess?
Well, hopefully, Alshon Jeffrey doesn't make me look like a goofball for saying that he absolutely wasn't going to play Thursday night, but I still think there's enough concern there, and Adam Schefter is kind of backing that up today. But if you follow me on Twitter and you follow David Chow at ProFootballDoc on Twitter, David and I know each other a little bit. We've talked a little bit, and he's had long experience as the team physician with the San Diego Chargers, and he was pretty confident that Jeffrey would have a pretty good chance to play today on Saturday afternoon. So Jeffrey was able to get through a partial practice on Friday. He was allowed to speak with the media on Friday. He got on the team plane to San Francisco yesterday morning. All of those are much better signs than what we're hearing on Thursday. But I've got a little bit different read of what he told reporters in the locker room on Thursday when he said, "I'm feeling pretty good, but it ain't a game, it's practice." So I think that's telling that he knows that he's not 100%, and he's going to try to play. They'll warm him up tonight in warm-ups, and if he can convince the staff that he's healthy enough to go, then I think we may see him active, especially since Brandon Marshall is struggling, and we don't know exactly what his status is. Marshall didn't practice at all this week. But the question I would have for folks that are telling me, they were just cautious last week. It was a close game. They didn't want to take any risks with him. If you're losing at home in a close game in your home opener in a tough division where you've got to face Detroit and Green Bay, and every game is probably important, if you're so cautious that you don't want him to play in the third quarter, the fourth quarter, overtime of that game, why are they going to be less cautious with him today? So I'm still skeptical that we'll see Jeffrey on the field in uniform tonight. I hope that's the case. I hope I'm wrong. I hope he plays well and we don't have to worry about Jeffrey for the rest of the year. But there's still enough going on, despite the positive signs that we heard yesterday and Friday afternoon, to think that Jeffrey's going to have a hard time playing tonight. And Adam Schefter seems to think that's the case as well. If nothing else, Adam Schefter saying there's a 75% chance or better that he won't play tells you that both Jeffrey and Marshall are much closer to the doubtful side of questionable than the probable side. And yes, if both of those guys don't play, all that the Bears have are Santonio Holmes, 2 practice squad receivers, and Martellus Bennett. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to put Jeffrey out on the field if he's not ready to play. Bottom line, Bloom, you tweeted out, and I'll let you kind of talk about who your hedges can be for the Sunday night game and the Monday night game. But I would not bench somebody valuable in these early games today, hoping that Marshall and or Jeffrey can go in your lineup. Because even if they do, if they're not effective, or if there's an aggravation early in the game, you may only get a target or 2 out of them. So you have to be sure, unless you're willing and you're a gambler and you're willing to take the 0, you have to be sure that you've got somebody else that you can put in tonight or Monday in Monday night's game to be able to have these guys in your lineup right now.
Yeah, and the hedges, if you can move one of these 2 guys to flex, that widens your scope to guys like Bradshaw and Hyde and Sproles and Trent Richardson. If it's only a wide receiver, you got Santonio Holmes, of course. You've got Stevie Johnson. I'm thinking of guys who may be on your waiver wire. Hakeem Nicks, Jordan Matthews, Riley Cooper. Not much. But, Gene, I want to go another level on this. Based on what we know about these injuries, because active versus inactive, you're not out of the woods when they're active. They may be limited. They may just be a decoy. They may not play, or they may get out there, play a series, test it, and say, it's not happening tonight. Or even worse, re-aggravate the injury. Or aggravate it, re-injure. So based on what we know, and we're just kind of looking, seeing which way the wind's blowing here. But sometimes with some of these injuries, we say, hey, if he's active, he's in your lineup. How does that apply to Marshall and Jeffrey?
Yeah, that's a tough call today, because I would think that with all of the concern that there was with both these guys in practice, if they are active, then my sense is that they probably feel well enough that they're going to be able to get through the game. They're not going to be 100%, but both of these guys with Jay Cutler, with the way they play, they don't necessarily have to be at 100% to get open to catch passes from Jay Cutler. So if you're deciding between somebody that you really do not want to play as a hedge option and Jeffrey or Marshall are active, then you might take the risk there, simply because if they can get through the game against this defense, that they're going to get a lot of targets and they may produce for you. Yes, there's going to be a high-risk situation there. It's going to be more boom-bust than you might be comfortable with. But if you decide, I just do not want to take the risk of Santonio Holmes, or I don't want to take the risk of Jordan Matthews, Marshall and Jeffrey, if they're active because of how their situation has gone this week, you might roll the dice with them.
Okay, and it's funny, we pictured the show being kind of an injury update, a preview show, do some different things, and the injuries are not cooperating with us. Matt, I don't want you to get too bored, buddy. Do you have any Marshall or Jeffrey decisions that make in your lineups today?
No, actually I don't, but I do have Santonio Holmes decisions as a flex, maybe over a guy like, say, Devin Hester. And right now I'm starting Devin Hester, mainly because I think that the unpredictability of who Cutler's going to target and who's going to be on the field is a overriding factor, and I think that Hester's going to get enough targets because I think he and Harry Douglas are combining to basically replace Tony Gonzalez's targets in Atlanta right now. So you look at those situations and think about what are the potential number of targets that you're going to see from a player, and that should help you, in terms of your decision. If it were a later period of time in the season, I would talk about somebody like Michael Spurlock as a what the heck flex if he's on the field because of both Jeffrey and Marshall being out. Spurlock seems to be a guy that has really good skill after the catch, has been somewhat reliable when he's seen time with a variety of teams in terms of catching the football, and has kind of had that big play ability. So I wouldn't be surprised at the end of the day if you are in a league where you're already desperate to find somebody or anybody, and you're worried that you're going to take a 0, but somehow you're able to acquire off the waiver wire somebody just from a desperation play. Maybe Spurlock might be someone to just consider if the news is that Jeffrey or Marshall are either extremely limited or both out.
Okay, Gene, and by the way, folks, subscribers, you will get Gene Bramwell his game day injury expectations every week, and he's updating this as the morning goes on. So even things after this hangout will be up there. But Gene, you've added there that Ian Rappaport has said that the Cardinals expect Palmer to play, assuming his arm feels good pregame. He's performed without practicing before. And not so much Palmer, but it's one of the variables, as we already discussed, in Andre Ellington choices today. Another variable is he played Monday night. He looked not 100% of himself, not hobbled or greatly limited. Now we go to the Giants, and as you were talking about the Giants' defense, actually I'll say this. The Giants' run defense was pretty stout against Detroit, and you have these guys like Hankins starting to play for them, really starting to hit their peak, and there's a lot of ins and outs to this Ellington issue. One of them being the injury coming into Sunday, another of them being the Palmer injury. We're getting into some calculus here, but let's just take that one injury variable on Ellington. What insight can you add there?
Yeah, let's try to avoid the quadratic equations of the Andre Ellington situation for sure, if we can, because I got through about the first couple of days of calculus, and then I was, science is okay and math is okay, but there's not much more I can do with that. But I think you're right. I think Ellington's injury is a concern, Palmer's injury is a concern, and I would not discount the Giants' front seven. And you also can't discount the fact that you've got a West Coast team traveling to play a New York team that's backs against the wall during an early game. Now, that doesn't mean that you sit on Andre Ellington, but I think you can easily foresee a game script by which, yes, Andre Ellington would normally get 8 to 10 receptions in a come-from-behind situation. That may not happen today, given his injury situation. I really feel like they're trying to manage him as best they can to get to that week 4 bye week, give him 2 consecutive weeks to allow this injury to heal, and then see what happens after that. He was in a boot for 2 or 3 days. That in and of itself isn't necessarily that concerning. A lot of teams will try to manage joint and tendon injuries by immobilizing that joint, tolerating a little bit of stiffness so that they can relieve whatever inflammation may occur by a little bit of weight bearing and movement in that joint. So I'm not too concerned that Ellington was in the boot, but it just tells you that that injury is not close to fully healed yet. And I'm not sure that I still buy into what Bruce Arians was saying, that there's no chance that Ellington can aggravate this injury moving forward. Otherwise, they would have played him a little bit more last week. I think they would have allowed him to practice a bit more to make sure that he's comfortable with the game plan that's in place. So for all of those reasons, all 4 of those potential concerns today, I wouldn't consider Ellington much more than a boom-bust running back 2. Does he have running back 1 upside in this particular game script? Yes, but there's also a chance that he doesn't come close to getting the 18 touches he had on Monday night.
A couple of things we don't have questions about their status today, but just really briefly, Gene, and then Matt, I want to ask you about potential options here for people that are replacing Jordan Cameron. It sounds like, again, Schefter's saying unlikely to play. Let's go ahead and just assume he's not going to play. Gene, I guess the question I have for you overall here is, how much does this diminish Cameron's season-long outlook, or just add a shadow to it? I mean, if we were drafting today, we had Cameron as clearly the 4th tight end in the top 4, and there was a gap to the next 5. Does something like this, if we were drafting today, would Cameron be closer to that second group, maybe even fall to that second group, or is this one of those things that we know enough about this type of injury that, given the fact they're resting him, once he's back on the field, it's business as usual?
Well, I think the solid start, better than solid start from Julius Thomas, and the fact that Ron Gronkowski was on the field in week 1 and came out with no setbacks, those guys have separated themselves out from that kind of mini tier. So I think there's a clear top 3 today if I was drafting today. And I'm not sure that Cameron falls all the way down to the Rudolph, Davis, Ertz tier necessarily, but I wouldn't have been drafting him in the 3rd or 4th round had I known that this injury was as likely to be aggravated as it seemed to be, because he got through those last 3 preseason games and practices in those weeks without too much difficulty. I think it's probably a good thing that they're letting this injury cool off as much as it does, but it also raises a concern, even though he said his MRI was negative, that Cameron's shoulder is at a little bit of higher grade injury than it was in the past. This is something that a lot of guys are able to play through with some padding and some pain control. So hopefully this is a 1-week thing. But we've got that week 4 bye week looming in the background, both for Ben Tate and Jordan Cameron. And if they're letting him cool off this week and he's not ready for next week, it's going to be pretty easy for them to sit him in week 3 as well and give him a full month for this injury to recover. If you're holding Jordan Cameron and that happens, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think because they've not allowed him to practice and he's not going to play today, if he's not ready to go Wednesday, Thursday, of next week, I don't think we'll see him in week 3. It's probably going to be week 5.
So definitely a hit, although the hope would be that in week 5 he could resume. I mean, the thing was last week I went back and watched the Steelers-Browns game, and last week he straight up burned Lawrence Timmons on his 43-yard catch. I mean, Timmons was laboring and could not catch up to Jordan Cameron. Timmons is, I mean, well, maybe, Timmons is in the late summer of his career, so he's not as fast as he used to be. But that is impressive. Impressive, Matt. Also, some performances from some waiver wire types last week. If somebody's scrambling to get, I mean, if you have a Travis Kelce, or if you have a Dwayne Allen, or if they're on your waiver wire, or Delaney Walker for that matter against Dallas. It's the refrain this year in fantasy football is who's Dallas playing. So Kelce, Allen, Walker. These are some slam dunks. But Matt, if you don't have the luxury of one of those guys and you have to replace Cameron this week, and you're looking through some waiver wire types, Jeff Cumberland, Larry Donnell, Mercedes Lewis, Niles Paul, and who stands out of the waiver wire bunch for people that have to plug somebody in for Cameron on short notice?
Those are certainly guys that I would consider. I mean, the first 3 you mentioned definitely are slam dunks. And then after that, I mean, you have to. I would even consider somebody like Jermaine Gresham, or because you're playing Atlanta's linebackers and safeties who can be a little bit over aggressive. So that might not be a bad play, even though he's never been like a fantastic option. You also have to consider somebody much like Zach Miller of Seattle, who's finally healthy and flashing a little bit, and they've praised him this week, and I think that he could be a decent red zone option because Seattle likes to play a lot of this run pass option type of kind of they like to use these types of plays where it uses the run to set up the tight end on crossing routes and a variety of other routes through some really neat kind of formation variations. And I would say that Miller is someone that I think could be sneaky good week in and week out as one of those desperation flex guys.
Okay, just to actually switch back to preview mode, because that's so much more fun than depressing injury mode, but we always love listening to Dr. Gene talk, Gene.
I won't take that personally.
So since you are a Seattle guy through and through now, we saw this Seattle offense week 1 against Green Bay. Some of that could be Green Bay's defense, Dom Capers. Some of that could be the home crowd. Some of that could be a lot of different things. As they go down the coast to San Diego this week, Matt, what's your outlook for the Seattle offense, and what are you going to be watching for today?
I think what I'm going to be watching for is how Jason Verrett, the San Diego cornerback, the rookie who played rather well last week against Arizona's group, is going to be able to handle somebody like Percy Harvin or some of these guys in more of the vertical game, because I don't think Arizona's vertical game was as on point as maybe it looked with some of the ability to hit Floyd on a couple of big plays. I think Seattle's going to test them a little bit more deep. I think that you're going to see them trying to incorporate that vertical game in this week. They've talked about in the local media that Jermaine Kearse they want to feature him more prominently in the vertical game this week. So I am looking for them to do that, because this is the type of team that when you hear kind of the rumblings of what they hope to do, they've been good enough to be able to do it. And so if that's, if they're talking Kearse, then I want to see that. I think that you're going to see also Doug Baldwin probably get a little bit more looks downfield as well. So, all of that should be on display. And of course, the running game is going to be, is going to continue to roll along here. So I would say earlier on, probably more play action and deep throws. And I think that some of the bland defensive looks that you probably saw from Don Capers was also to prevent some of the vertical plays so that they didn't get out of the game early on, even though that didn't help very much for them.
Okay, one last one that we're watching really quickly. Well, not really watching, because it seems basically set at this point that DeAngelo Williams is not going to play. And DeAngelo Williams looked pretty good against Tampa. He had his typical burst. And what we like about Williams is just so compact and that balance, and he fights through contact and looked good against Tampa Bay. Jonathan Stewart, not so much. So do you like Jonathan Stewart? Again, with the assumption that, do we think maybe, hey, knock some rust off, a little more work here against Detroit? But it is Detroit. For one, you mentioned Doug Baldwin. I for one traded Jonathan Stewart for Doug Baldwin in a dynasty league, and I was one of the guys. I was one of the last ones on the Stewart bandwagon. Last week, what I saw was he's lost something that he's not going to get back. No, maybe it was just 1 week, but in a dynasty league at this point, I'm ready to bail. But what about for this week, Matt? Any hope for people that have to play Jonathan Stewart?
Well, I'll just put it this way: in the leagues that you dropped Jonathan Stewart, I added him. So when I saw that, I was like, I've got some old running backs, but I've got a pretty good team, and I could use a couple of guys that, what the heck, let me see what goes on here. And I added him because I watched that game, and while I agree with you, he didn't look good, I think the whole Carolina offensive line didn't look all that great. And the reason, and part of the thing going on there too, is that Jonathan Stewart he's kind of that hybrid between what we call disparagingly a volume back and and a high-end athlete. And I think that because he hasn't played as much, he needs to get into a rhythm a little bit more than what we've seen in the past. And they don't do a very good job of sharing out the qualities, of meeting out the carries between these two backs. This week, unless they go with Mike Tolbert inexplicably, and much to the dismay of the Carolina fans that are tweeting on my timeline, Stewart could very well get 15 to 20 touches this week, and if he does, I still have enough faith in him to actually be a running back too for fantasy purposes this week. Detroit on the road, on grass, being Detroit, I'm still not completely convinced that they've turned the corner yet. I want to see 4 or 5 games before I'm feeling good about them turning the corner in terms of their attitude from 1 week to the next. And I think that you look at what Stewart did in the preseason, and I saw the burst, I saw the pop, I saw the power that was there, and last week I thought was more of a mirage that was basically induced by the Carolina offensive line and Stewart just not getting enough consistent looks in situations where he was going to be able to produce. Some of the play calls and where he was used in down and distance, I didn't think were really set up for any running back to succeed.
Okay, and again, I want to remind people that Football Guy subscribers will get Dr. Gene's full injury update from Sunday morning, continually updated as we get more information. There's some notes there on Roddy White, on Toby Gerhart, on Cam Newton. And I think that we've covered the most important ones, pressing. Gene, before I move full on into pregame mode, we get Jimmy the Greek in here. Any other things that you think are just really important, like glaring, red, flashing injuries, things to keep track of as people are setting their lineups today?
No, I don't think so. I'm really interested to see how Toby Gerhart plays today. I'm a little bit nervous about that ankle. I hope he plays better than C.J. Spiller and Roddy White did on that last year, and I hope there's no aggravations. Those of you who have IDPs on the defensive side of the ball, Mike Florio tweeted a little while ago that Greg Hardy might be deactivated today, presumably because of the off-field issues rather than anything that's happened injury-wise. Vontaze Burfict was a little bit of a question. Jeff Hobson said his status was still to be determined. I think they just wanted to see if he woke up this morning without any symptoms. It sounds like he's been cleared to play. So, no, I think, there could always be, once Jay Glazer gets on the screen here in a little while, oftentimes he'll have some late breaking news for us. Hopefully we'll know a little bit more about Carson Palmer. But for the most part, the guys that we've already talked about are the guys that we'll be watching. And I wouldn't expect to get any more information about Brandon Marshall or Alshon Jeffrey until 6, 7 o'clock Eastern time tonight at the earliest.
Okay, well, we can give you some preview takes here as we go into week 2. And, of course, week 2, as I said a few times on the show this week, week 2 is like what we saw in week 1 changes based on what we saw in week 2. We see in week 2. So, we're trying to determine, is it this team, this unit's that bad, or this unit's that good, or is it both? And we flesh that out a little bit more as we get that second data point on the chart. And I guess the glaring one that stands out right away, Matt, is that Dallas defense. And who's Dallas playing this week? So as you are looking over your lineups one last time, and let me first of all say that if you're looking over your lineups one last time, err on the side of not making changes, because that usually backfires. It has for me over the years. But as you're looking over your lineups one last time, Matt, and you're looking at these guys like Sean Green and Justin Hunter and Delaney Walker and Kendall Wright and Jake Locker, and I'm going to leave Locker a little bit to the side. The skill players, okay? it's close. Like, you're thinking about it, it's close. Should you be breaking all ties in favor of players facing Dallas until we find a reason to reverse that policy, or are we getting a little ahead of ourselves? These are still 11 grown men playing football with pride, and they're not just going to roll over.
Oh, they're not going to roll over, but they can get pushed over, knocked aside, and run over. And I think that that's probably going to happen. I mean, I don't believe that the Dallas defense has shown us anything that they're going to be able to get the job done against, a group of high-level professionals. And I think that that's what happens. They're not playing well as a unit. They don't have the personnel that they probably need, and I think that they're kind of a mess right now. So I don't really have any problem with saying let's take advantage of that, because you see that all the time in the NFL. Quarterbacks do it every week. The minute the starter gets injured, what do? They say, I'm going to try and throw it over the head of the corner who's right who gets inserted the game right away, and it often works. So the way I look at this is you got to have the same mentality when you're looking at a defense that doesn't start off well, especially against the San Francisco offense that is good but not that good. I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, San Francisco gets by on their defense and their run game, but they're not they're not a dynamic passing offense, even with the upgrades to some of the players that they have. So this is a situation that you have to look at Tennessee's starter seriously. Kendall Wright's going to can have another huge day, obviously, because of the fact that he's really an extension of their running game. Justin Hunter certainly is going to be a guy that's going to get his targets downfield. Nate Washington is a savvy enough receiver that when you look at what he can do,
yeah,
he should have a big week, just because he's going to be able to get open, and it won't just be let's force the ball to Justin Hunter. It's going to be more like, look how wide open Nate Washington is. So he wouldn't be a bad flex play to consider if you're trying to pull somebody off the waiver wire that might be available to you. And then, of course, you have to consider somebody like Sean Green. I mean, yeah. Sean Green doesn't look bad. And I would say, even if you're in a desperation flex mode for a running back because of certain recent suspensions and injuries, Dexter McCluster might not be that bad of a player to consider.
Or even Bishop Sankey, because if they get ahead, that's whenever you start getting the rookie, you start breaking them in and seeing how it goes.
To me, that's the last case scenario, only because I will say that I think Dallas's offense will improve enough against the Titans' defense, who are missing the likes of Zach Brown and whose secondary is kind of iffy in my eyes, that the fact that Sankey didn't even see touches until Leon Washington took the field last week, it does have me a little bit concerned about him. From that level. Certainly the talent level and the opportunity to want to give him carries if they get the lead is there, but if the Dallas offense can keep it close enough, it might be a good offensive day for the Titans, but not that good of a defensive day that we're going to see Sankey in there. But I understand the logic. That's just my counter argument to it.
Right. Well, again, like in this first week post, seeing the Dallas defense unveil, I'm saying, like, cast that net wide. I'm glad you included Nate Washington, for that matter. Cast that net wide. By the way, we're seeing right now Ian Rappaport reporting that Austin Davis, not Sean Hill, will get this. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who starts.
Here's another one.
Go ahead.
Consider. Taylor Thompson got enough looks as a second tight end, and they like what he's done this offseason. He might finally, he's not finally that guy that's going to come around that we've talked about in dynasty circles, but he was getting enough looks and consistently week one, and this was a consistent thing I saw in the preseason, that he might not be a bad idea as a desperation flex if you're missing a tight end.
Or in deep dynasty leagues or tight end premium dynasty leagues, like this could be a week that next week everyone's going to want to be picking up Taylor Thompson. But Gene, I want to do some quick fact checking here, because I'm prone to get excited or get carried away with myself. You are watching the defensive side of the ball with a jeweler's eye. You're looking closer, and you've got. Is Dallas's defense as bad as people like me have been saying, or are we going a little too far? Did you get a chance to watch Dallas? Is it really as abysmal as all of our exaggerations imply?
Abysmal might be too strong a term for it, but it's not good. I think Orlando McClain played a little bit better than expected. I think their defensive line played a little bit better than expected. The secondary has issues. So the defense isn't good, but it may not be as heroically and historically bad as it was toward the end of last year and as we expected it to be. But one more injury or Orlando McClain possibly turning back into a pumpkin, Anthony Spencer not being able to come back, any of those things may make it more difficult. And I think if the offense can't control the ball and puts that defense on the field for 70, 80 snaps a week, then it's probably going to fall like a house of cards as well. But I don't think it's quite as bad yet as what people are thinking.
Yeah, some hopeful stuff. And the heroism, of course, comes in when helping fantasy teams win weeks and win championships. Dallas's defense being heroic. So let's put the rubber to the road here on Jake Locker, okay? And I'll give each of you a shot at this. And we're using this as one data point, although I may go old on the couch style and toss a couple of other ones and see where the mountain climber falls off the cliff or where we stop the slide, okay? On one hand, Gene, you've got Jake Locker playing that Dallas defense. On the other hand here, you've got Matthew Stafford. Now, on one hand, Matthew Stafford was magnificent on Monday night, but that was against the Giants. Now he has to face Carolina, at Carolina, outdoors, grass, so on and so forth. And I do want to bring up that Aaron Rodgers was a player in week one. Now, it's not Seattle at Seattle, but Aaron Rodgers was a player where you had one camp that said, it's Aaron Rodgers, you're going to play him. The other camp said, whoa, breaks, it's still Seattle and Seattle. Carolina's not quite that caliber, but still something to think, and it puts in focus just how good is that Locker matchup when you're inclined to play him or not play him, and how much pause should you have because of Stafford against that bully front seven of Carolina.
Well, if Greg Hardy is not there in Carolina, that makes Stafford's matchup a lot better because I think the clear weak link of the Carolina defense is the secondary. It's really not a viable corner. The safeties there between Thomas Deku and Charles Godfrey will probably be the guy playing safety in the nickel packages, is the weak link of that defense. And I'm not putting anything past Calvin Johnson. The question is, will the combination of Pettigrew, Ebron, Golden Tate, Reggie Bush out of the backfield, possibly Joique Bell out of the backfield, be enough to overcome some of those issues? And I think it can be. I'm not too impressed with Carolina's defense in the back seven anyway, as far as coverage goes. Linebackers, yes. Secondary, no. So if the pass rush goes away, and Charles Johnson is not the stud pass rusher he once was, if Greg Hardy is not there, then you're relying on whatever you can get from the defensive tackles and a few other guys, backups, that aren't quite the caliber of Greg Hardy. So I'm okay with Matt Stafford today. Jake Locker, yes, Jake Locker looked good. I'd like to see a little bit more of an established trend. It sounds like Justin Hunter is healthy enough to go. Kendall Wright looking good. Matt's comments about the way the tight ends have been out there. I think Jake Locker needs to show me a little bit more than 1 week before I'm willing to buy into him as a strong quarterback by committee quarterback too.
Matt, do you share that pause, that hesitation to just say, Locker top 6 this week, it's Dallas?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think he's top 6 this week, even if it is Dallas. I think they're going to be able to run, and he's going to have some good play. But, again, you're looking at a situation where they could get ahead early and then run the ball a good bit. So I also think that Locker isn't all, they're doing enough to allow him to do what he does best, but there's still times where I see the inaccuracy, where I see the decision making that's a little bit reckless. If I have a chance to use Matthew Stafford, I'm going to use Matthew Stafford. I mean, no apologies. I don't care who he's playing against. I think that Stafford is honestly a top 3, top 4 quarterback this year. I've felt that way since August, and I think that it's going to, and it hasn't changed my mind. So if it's between those two guys, I'm going Stafford all the way right now, even if the defense is tough.
Okay, and we'll see. As of about a half hour ago, Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, said he's hearing there's still a chance that Hardy will be deactivated. So we'll watch that, of course. If you're following us on Twitter, if you're on Twitter at all, you will know. And we'll be updating that on the Football Guys Newswire, among other places. We're not going to get into any of the issues of what Adrian Peterson did and what's going to happen to Adrian Peterson. We're going to talk about week 2, and we're going to talk about the Vikings running game that Peterson will not be part of. Matt Asiata, and for that matter, we don't have to do the full breakdown of Jerick McKinnon's game and the scouting report, but just giving people a little taste. How do you think they're going to roll out the running backs this week? And for lineup decisions this week, is Asiata a flex? Is he maybe even a little bit better because of how terrible New England was defending the run? And then McKinnon, if somebody's 16, 18-man rosters, right before the lineups lock and kickoff happens, you might be able to swap McKinnon out for somebody. Is McKinnon one of those guys you want to make a preemptive pickup?
He's a risk. He's kind of a risk the way that Isaiah Crowell was a risk heading into last week. So if you think about Crowell heading into last week, not what he did, but what you were thinking heading into last week, McKinnon's similar. He's a high-end athlete. He certainly can catch the ball. He has really good speed and agility. Need to see him, though, get comfortable in a pro-style offense because he ran a lot of option before he was the after he was the quarterback and switched. He was often either used as a wing back, running around a formation, and going to the edge, or he was kind of the dive fullback kind of up there, in a lot of plays. So McKinnon to me is a little bit unproven, conceptually going to be a little bit slower, and he's a guy that I would be a little bit more worried about this week. He's a wait and see, and you can take a chance on him, but it is a risk, especially with so many proven players still out there on the waiver wire. Matt Asiata is nothing special. He's a guy that's going to get you some tough yards. Think of him as maybe a younger version of Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis, but a lesser version of that, I would say. Kind of maybe a younger version of Cincinnati, of the Cincinnati incarnation of Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis. That might be what you're looking at with Asiata. But if he gets enough carries, he can be a fantasy factor as a flex for sure, and I think you can count on him as such. The guy that is probably going to benefit even more, and I think we talked about this last night off the air balloon, is Cordero Patterson. I mean, he could end up with enough touches in the run game that he's going to be the one with the big plays. The fact that he had a 100-yard week last week, on a handful of touches against a pretty good St. Louis defense, should tell you that this team, that the Patriots are going to be awfully worried about Cordero in the open field doing his, I would say, Gale Sayers imitation, but I don't think anything that Cordero Patterson does with the football is imitation quality. I mean, this guy is probably the best non-running back open field runner that I've ever seen, and
yes.
And it's not going to change. He's so natural with it and what he does. I mean, just watch some of his Tennessee runs and then watch some of his runs with Minnesota, and I think you could stack him up there with some of the greatest open field runs of all time. The guy is like a musical genius out in the open field.
He's a prodigy, and it's speed, it's power, it's moves, and he makes NFL. And remember, that run last week was not against a punt team. That was not against a special teams unit. That was against a defense, and he made them look silly.
It was a toss play from the backfield.
It was about one of the most basic run plays in football. And out of the 11 guys on that defense, like 7 or 8 had a shot at him on the play. And sometimes there was one-on-one in the open field where Patterson would just slow his feet, and as soon as he would see the defender do anything, it's checkmate.
And when you can at full speed make the cuts that he does to get across the field after running 25, 30, 40 yards, that's what does it. You see Reggie Bush attempt to do that. You see guys in college who are top running backs attempt to do that, but you don't often see a guy at the pro game who is not a top running back actually succeed on a consistent basis in making these across the body cuts after running at full tilt at that many yards downfield with that kind of momentum. You know that those are the types of runs that you look at, and you're going to be able to separate between a really good runner and a great runner. And Cordero Patterson, maybe not between the tackles, is a great runner, though he's pretty darn good. He is a great open field runner.
And wait until he learns how to play wide receiver. But today, if they give him 8 or 10 of those type of plays instead of 3, because the other thing is on those 2 plays last week that he didn't score touchdowns, he was 1 broken tackle away from getting into the open field and making it look a lot like that touchdown run. And it's just scary. But Gene, I don't want you to get bored now that Matt and I are having I'm getting faint here as I talk about Cordero Patterson, Gene. What about that New England defense? What are you going to be watching for? Because they look like they were on roller skates at times last week. And again, if you're weighing Matt Asiata against Jonathan Stewart or some of these other flex plays, that should factor into it. Do you think Bill Belichick will put some gauze and some tape on this run defense and firm it up? Or are we starting to look at maybe New England as a defense to exploit when you have running backs going against them?
I think there'll be some gauze and some Band-Aids and probably some ace wraps and everything else put on there. The interesting thing this week is Jamie Collins has a quad injury. He suffered on Thursday and is not going to go today, didn't even make the flight with the team. So there's going to be some reshuffling of that front seven. Probably what that means is we see Chandler Jones moved back to an outside linebacker role, and this is assuming they stay with the 3-4 and don't go back to a 4-3. If that happens, we're going to see more Dominic Easley outside. Both of those guys are more athletic on that weak side, and they may be a little bit better served to stop the run. They'll be moving Dante Hightower inside in a 3-4 or putting him back on the strong side, possibly, or on the weak side across from Rob Ninkovich if they do 4-3. So I think both of those moves, considering that Jamie Collins was okay but not great, and the defensive line great at all against the run, even though Miami used some interesting concepts that New England probably hadn't seen before based on what we're hearing. I think the New England defense is going to be better. And Matt Asiata is not not that Noshan Marino is athletic necessarily, but Marino is a pretty good runner in his own right between the tackles. Asiata had a couple of good games last year, but I think that was more due to the offensive line than any specific talent that he has. I think New England's probably going to be a little bit better with this alignment, even with Collins out. I think they're going to be, they've seen that they have some issues that they need to shore up. Belichick will do that, and I would expect them to be better this week.
Okay, moving on. We are going to see in week one, again, the potential corrections or amplifications of some of these changes where teams come out of the gate. Matt, I want to ask you about Cleveland's a very interesting hurry-up running game. We saw the Steelers, now granted, Bernard Pierce and Justin Forsett did break some long runs in the fourth quarter once the Steelers were waving the white flag. But until then, the Steelers were somewhat firm against Baltimore's run offense. Now, Baltimore's run offense didn't really have much leeway against Cincinnati. So we put all this stuff together, and we try to distill out of this, because Cleveland's run game wasn't that impressive until the second half, but in the second half, it looked like they could do whatever they wanted against the Steelers. So we see Cleveland going against New Orleans today. You've already brought up Isaiah Crowell once. People that are looking at Terrence West or Isaiah Crowell, for now at least, Kyle Shanahan struck something, especially with Jordan Cameron out. I mean, why would they go away from this? Have they struck something? Are we going to see New Orleans have some issues? We did see New Orleans give up big plays to Jaquiz Rogers, to Anton Smith last week. Do you think that Cleveland hurry-up running game could be the start of something special?
Well, I'm hopeful that Mike Pettin is a little quicker on the uptake than maybe some past Cleveland coaches have been and past Cleveland teams have been. Hopefully his team is more responsive in looking at what they should be doing. And if they are, then yes, on paper, I would say that Cleveland has found something here. And watching New Orleans defense against Atlanta last week, Steven Jackson looked pretty good. Certainly so did Jaquiz Rogers, Devonta Freeman, and Anton Smith. And while they didn't run the ball an awful lot because of the fact that they had to kind of mix it in, they were effective, and it was with a subpar offensive line where they lost two of their players by the end of the first half. So Cleveland's got a better offensive line. I think that the two running backs that they have are pretty, from a talent, leg, kind of youth energy standpoint, probably are better than what we have at Steven Jackson at his age right now. Maybe those factors would get an edge over Jackson's veteran skill and experience to some extent. So the way I look at this is, as long as the defense can play well enough early on and the offense can convert third downs early, then the running game will continue to be a major part of the game plan. The problem is them losing the game script early, and that can happen because if Cleveland starts slow, and we've joked about this on other shows, the AFC North tends to be a slow-to-wake division. It's like they had a late night in the steel plant, or maybe at the bar after the steel plant, and they need their diner breakfast, in the morning, and maybe a few cups of coffee before they wake up and get started to work. They could be down 21-0, and no matter what, they're not going to be able to run all that much, and that means Crowell doesn't become as much of a factor unless West just completely screws it up in the passing game, and then they insert Crowell in lieu of that.
Okay, so real quick, as the other part of the equation here, and guys, can we go a little bit past 11? Is that okay? You guys got any pressing engagements? I hate to ask you that on the air because you're allowed to say no. I'm not putting you on the spot. I don't want to do that thing like it's like I'm proposing to you on the scoreboard at the baseball game. Will you marry me? And if you say no, who looks like the bad guy? But Matt, as you said, one other part of that equation is do they get taken out of that script early? Do you buy into the narrative that, hey, Drew Brees indoors is one thing, Drew Brees outdoors is a whole nother thing, and maybe that lowers the chances that the Saints come out and go up 21-0 or 21-3 and get them out of their comfort zone?
I buy that the Drew Brees led offense is one thing, and the Drew Brees led offense on grass is another thing, but it's not Drew Brees, it's the weapons that he has to work with. And I would say this year is a better opportunity to say that that's not going to be the case, because they actually do have a ground game, and they have a coach who's been kind of slow on the uptake when it comes to using that ground game. And I think that Sean Payton has gotten the message a little bit. He's seen enough proof, I guess, to say that they can incorporate the run game a little bit more. But looking at this offense right now, we don't have a lot of the, other than Brandon Cooks, we don't have a lot of that fast strike, kind of thing going on, because Kenny Stills is out, and Lance Moore is gone. No more Devery Henderson. Robert Meacham is, has his, Family Guy chicken where he gets maybe one good catch every few episodes, and that's what goes on with him. So this team is probably going to be okay in that regard in terms of being able to move the ball up and down the field, but that does play into reducing the potential for them going up early, because they may run a little bit more also, and incorporating that game plan. If they stay patient with it, it may mean they're only up 13-0 or 14-3 or something like that, where Cleveland, if they stay patient, can continue to run the ball and maybe get back into the game. So I buy into it a little bit, but it's not that Drew Brees is bad on grass. It's just that the offense is historically not executed as well. And also the Dome is an advantage for them. That's a loud place to be in.
It is. Again, and West Crowell, I think, are the main guys we're looking at here, where the fact that the game's in Cleveland and New Orleans, it's a plus. Going further south in the state of Ohio, Gene, Andy Dalton. Now, Andy Dalton was somebody that the fantasy world, even though he finished in the top 5 last week, for the most part moved on. There are some defenders out there on our staff. Dan Hendry and Heath Cummings come to mind. And is this a day that Dan and Heath are going to have their chests puffed out and say, see, because Andy Dalton's at home, Andy Dalton's playing the Atlanta defense? Is this a case where, Jay Cutler, for instance, if you're weighing Cutler against Dalton, or maybe you're a little skittish about RG3, is Andy Dalton a nice, viable play today?
Sure. I think so. Andy Dalton is what he is. His arm strength isn't going to get any better, right? His decision-making in the pocket is not likely to get that much better, but we know that he's capable of putting up 350, 400 yards and multiple touchdowns. Here we go. Andy Dalton right on my screen. So there would be no question that I would roll with Andy Dalton over Jay Cutler today. There's just too much uncertainty with what's going on with the wide receivers. Over the other guys we're talking about, RG3, I'm still a little bit nervous about him. I listened to Greg Cosell, who thought he played a little bit better than what I thought he did. He blamed some of RG3's struggles on the protection, which was definitely a concern. But that issue is not going away anytime soon. And it's with Jacksonville today, right? Jacksonville's front 7 pass rushers is not that there's some stuff going on there. Chris Clemens, Andre Branch, there's some guys inside, Derek Marks, that have been playing pretty well. That issue is not going away. Jake Locker for sure. I'm starting Andy Dalton over Jake Locker today. There's lots of guys there, so Andy Dalton is kind of in that flex area between low quarterback 1 to high quarterback 2, but that's not necessarily a knock on Dalton. He's still a fine fantasy play.
You share that optimism? I mean, we kid about his complexion, Matt. Do you share that optimism? And I want to go back to Dalton versus Locker, because I think that's one of the more interesting ones for quarterback streamers. What's your outlook on Dalton today against Atlanta at home?
I like it, and I actually think I would take Dalton over Locker, because I think there's a greater chance for that game script to flow where that it's going to have to be more of a shootout. And as a result of that, he may make mistakes that cost him the game, but it doesn't mean that he's not going to be able to go down slinging and be able to to make enough plays. And there's enough weaponry in that offense that he's reliant upon. Even without Marvin Jones, you still have Gresham, because Gresham and him have rapport. They've had that well before Tyler Eifert came in, and the hype was greater than what he was able to do thus far because he's a young player. And the same with Jones, who was competing time with Sanu, and certainly Dalton and Sanu have enough of a rapport. So I like this. I think that Atlanta will set the pace, and that means that Cincinnati will have to follow and keep up, and I think that Dalton is capable of doing that. So I like it a lot.
The only early game that we haven't really addressed specifically on any of these questions, Matt, is Miami at Buffalo. I guess my biggest question out of this is, again, that week one revelation about Miami's running game. Like, they have a running game. And Gene talked about New England's problems defending that running game and adjustments they may make against Minnesota today. But let's go back to Miami and let's think about Lamar Miller, and let's think about Noshawn Moreno as fantasy plays today. Are you more likely to bet that, another good game for them? The running game is on track. Defenses are going to have to adjust and figure it out, and until they do, both of these guys are going to at least be flex plays with upside, maybe Moreno running back 2 with upside. Or do you think that this is one of those cases where the success is exaggerated? There's some things that New England were doing so glaringly wrong that you can't count on that week to week, and otherwise we may look back at that as a week one fluke.
I don't think it's going to necessarily be a fluke. We may not have the same upside as what we saw last week in Miami, but I do think that what Buffalo gave up to Matt Forte, it's capable of them being able to give the same thing up when it comes to the Miami running backs. I thought that the offensive line played fairly well, and Lamar Miller played good football, barring the fumble that he had where he took a hit that I think 95% of the running backs in the NFL would have had that ball pop loose. Miller looked very good, and that was kind of a hidden gem in that game, because of the way that Noshawn Moreno played. We kind of miss on that because Miller was able to catch the ball in the backfield very well. And he was able to make some really nice runs between the tackles. I look at this as a really nice 1-2 punch where Moreno is probably RB1, RB2 kind of in between there. And I think that Miller can be between that running back 2, running back 3 type of play. He's a little bit riskier at this stage, but I still like it, especially because Buffalo's offense isn't exactly going to force Miami out of what they do. And right now you have to understand, too, that Ryan Tannehill is still kind of a work in progress. He's still having to figure out he's trying to target players in the middle of the field in this Eagles South offense, and he's doing it at the wrong times, and his accuracy isn't completely there. So I would probably say that you probably want to look at Moreno and Miller as guys setting the tone for this offense, and I would feel pretty good about starting them this week.
Gene, I want to ask you another, sort of.
Rappaport just tweeted that Carson Palmer is out today, by the way.
Oh,
tested his shoulder, not good to go.
Okay, this is fun, and I know nobody cares about your fantasy team. Nobody cares about my fantasy team, but this is a fun question that I'm sure there are a few other people out there. I am in a league, yes, I am in a league where I have Carson Palmer as my only quarterback. Part of the reason I have Carson Palmer as my only quarterback is because, this league is only 22-man rosters. It's 14 teams, so there are always starting quarterbacks on the waiver wire. Well, that doesn't mean they're good ones, though. So here
what happened was
right. So here's a fun choice. This is like fantasy football's greatest. Here are my choices, guys. I'm going to let you pick my quarterback between the two of you, unless you don't agree. Okay, I could start Austin Davis. If he's starting, I can start the St. Louis quarterback. I can start Eli Manning. I can start Brian Hoyer. I can start Matt Castle, or I can start Chad Henne. Matt Waldman, who do I play?
I think I'm going with Brian Hoyer.
Hoyer against the Saints.
Yep.
Gene, Bramble, Henne, Castle, Hoyer, Eli Manning, or the St. Louis quarterback. A lot of people out there may be facing this choice. I hope I'm not the only one. Otherwise, I'm embarrassed.
Give him to me again. My gut.
Henne.
That was my first reaction was Henne, but he's on the road. So give me the rest.
Castle, Hoyer, Eli, St. Louis quarterbacks.
Oh, boy.
Interceptions go against you?
I think interceptions are maybe like -1. I mean, let me see. Who threw an interception last week?
Well,
-2. It's -2 for.
Yeah, then I'm still taking Hoyer over Eli.
Ugh. Matt Castle arguably has the best options. I don't like him all that much, but he's throwing to Patterson. He's throwing to Jennings. He might have a decent outlet receiver out of the backfield. Greg Rudolph is there. I don't necessarily like any of those guys, but I'll go with the guy that has the best weapons, and I'll say Castle and cross your fingers.
Yeah, my team is solid. So I mean, this is one where I'm going to go ahead and take Castle because I do think he's the safest to play. He's the guy that I think is least likely to implode. I say that, and I'm sure that I've doomed him. But I want to go back to one of those other choices that we did not pick, Chad Henne, and not Henne, but Alan Hearns. Alan Hearns, who we're now hearing even after Cecil Shorts is a starter, Hearns will remain a starter. Matt, how inclined should you play Hearns this week if you got him as a choice? Are you contorting yourself? Are you trying to talk yourself into it? Or again, is this one where, at least for now, it's better to bet on the week 1 fluke?
I'm talking myself into it if I'm looking at a low end, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and I've got some guys that might be a little bit injured or banged up or have really tough matchups, but that's about it. Because I'm not a believer that it was a fluke in terms of his ability, but I do believe that it might be a fluke in terms of what they're going to do long term, and he is going to probably see better cornerback coverage, moving forward as opposed to maybe what they anticipated. Because again, unproven guys who jump into a game and they're young rookies. There's not a lot of scouting for these guys. And there's also this kind of take where let's just see what he can do, and they don't think very much of these young players, and they can get beat that way. So I think Hearns is going to have a little bit more of more difficult matchups down the line, but I think he's capable of being able to handle it and make the adjustment. But I don't see him being a wide receiver 1 like he was last week. I think you're going to be looking at wide receiver 3 material when everything's kind of evened out over the course of the weeks, as long as he's on the field and Shorts is out.
Gene, does this change at all the possibility that this is an issue for Palmer next week, the possibility this is an issue for Palmer all year, or so on?
No question. Yeah, I think it may not be, again, because we don't know specifically what the injury is, specifically which nerve is impacted, why it's impacted, what the problem is. But any nerve issue that's affecting a quarterback in this way, to where there's pain or weakness or something else involved that lasts longer than 5 or 7 days. So to kind of put a corollary on this, Joseph Adai, Ahmad Bradshaw, lots of players in the past who have had stinger-type injuries, if the symptoms last longer than 15 minutes, you don't know how long they're going to last, and if they last as long as a week, it might be a month or more where those symptoms are still there. Again, we're talking about specific types of injuries, but nerve issues that last this long, that prevent a player from throwing and being ready in a week, make you wonder if it's going to be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or longer. So stay tuned for practice next week for Palmer for sure.
Yeah, and again, as we led off the show, that really affects the whole Cardinals offense. I mean, we'll see. Hey, maybe Drew Stanton answers the bell in some way that, I mean, and we will say that about Drew Stanton. He's a gutsy player. He's a player who's going to go down swinging. That's why he and Bruce Arians are simpatico. That's why he's followed him, from one team to another team now, because I think that Stanton is at least going to be in line with that idea of taking chances of the vertical offense. We'll see how successful he is as we're winding up here, and we're gonna be putting a bow on this very soon. But Gene, I want to ask you another question, a sort of like, again, Gene Bramwell's Xanax, calm us down, the antidote to Sigmund Bloom, who gets a little ahead of himself, about the Green Bay run defense. And we got another late game, 5 late games. Yay to the schedule makers! 5 late games instead of 2 late games. Jets going to Green Bay. What is that? What is that, Matt? It's like eat your vegetables or something?
That's Saucy Q. We're getting
Oh,
ready tonight.
Saucy Q. Yay to the schedule makers. So, how again, we watched Green Bay's run defense on that first night look just so poor. Again, we have flex. Well, Chris Ivory possibly a flex. Chris Johnson possibly a running back too. And I want to say really quick, Matt Waldron and I were talking about this last night again. What the Jets are asking Chris Johnson to do, he's good at. And we haven't seen Tennessee do that lately for a while now. I'm sorry, I'm taking away Gene's thunder here as he was preparing a Green Bay defense take. But, Matt, I want you to just quickly briefly expound on this. That Chris Johnson, although he's been a whipping boy because of his half-hearted effort on some plays and things like that, the way he's been plugged into this Jets offense, it's not quite CJ2K. I mean, he looks like what CJ2K would have looked like 5 or 6 years later.
Yeah, they're giving him plays where he's having the opportunity to hit the hole pretty decisively and get into the second level where then his agility and burst and change of direction can still be a factor, as opposed to in the Titans scheme where he's had to make a few more decisions early on behind the line of scrimmage and often failed. So I think it's a combination of either maybe the message that was sent for him not staying in Tennessee, as well as what the Jets offensive line has been doing. So I think that really he's a nice play right now. I would certainly use him if someone wanted to trade him to me for, in exchange for something where I needed a running back. I would take him as a running back 2 capable of running back 1 moments or running back 1 weeks. So he has looked good, and I think that it's not a fluke, even though it was the Raiders that they were playing.
Yeah, it's the Packers this week. Perfect. Thank you for the segue setup. Back to Dr. Gene here. Because it's Chris Ivory with injury upside. Chris Ivory getting hurt would add in future weeks potentially some upside for Johnson. But let's go back to that Green Bay run defense. Gene, do we see a correction, or do you think that there are some signs that Green Bay's run defense is going to be a good matchup all year?
I think, first of all, I love David Dodd's last tweet to project Drew Stanton. I halved Carson Palmer's numbers, but that looked too high, so I halved them again.
This is like the Zenith paradox or something. Like, we can never get to 0 with Drew Stanton's numbers, but we'll try to get close.
Infinity, yes. More math. Keep the calculus out of it. But yeah, the problem with Green Bay's defense is they've got a front 3 without B.J. Raji. Mike Daniels and Dayton Jones are good players, but they're more not seat-of-the-pants guys, stop and play 2-gap. They want to get upfield to stop the run, and that's all well and good. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you've got a nose tackle that can't play 2-gap effectively, if you've got inside linebackers that are either hurt or not dynamic against the run, then you're going to have problems between the tackles, and that's what we saw last week. That's going to continue. Hopefully they'll find somebody that can plug the run up a little bit more. We're going to see Jamari Lattimore play in place of Brad Jones today, and apparently his issues last year were due more to a viral infection that slowed him down due to anything else. A.J. Hawk might be okay, but they're going to have to come up with some way schematically to play the run differently than they did last week, because the issues that they have in that front 7 aren't going away.
Okay, unfortunately, and folks, and I want to hear from folks. I want to hear if this is helpful. I want to hear what we can do to take this time and make it something that helps your fantasy teams. I would love to be able to hang out with y'all right up until game time. Unfortunately, radio spots and duties at Football Guys with the newswire and projections and things like that interfere. However, we are still going to be on Twitter right up until game time, as always, and during the games, as always. We're not going to leave you. But really quick, guys, I guess I want to give you just one last chance to do a parting shot, and it can really be anything you want. Strong up takes or down takes, or as you were looking at the matchups this week, something that stood out that maybe people aren't mentioning, an individual player, something that when you were looking through your lineup stood out to you and said, I wasn't going to play him, and then I looked at it and he's going to be a good play this week, or vice versa. Just some things, maybe 1 or 2 more little before we, pat everyone on the butt and send them out of the locker room with their fantasy teams this week. 1 or 2 other things to keep in mind. First, you, Matt.
I would say don't overreact to this Adrian Peterson situation in terms of fantasy when you're looking at the likes of Matt Asiata and Jerick McKinnon, especially when you're weighing somebody like McKinnon over and Isaiah Crowell, because people say, well, Ben Tate's likely going to be coming back. Adrian Peterson might be gone for a long time. We just don't know what's going to happen with all that. I mean, I'll just say with this situation, I'll echo, I think what Football Guys has mentioned and what we've discussed is we don't know what the NFL is going to do. I mean, after what's happened with Ray Rice, what's happened with Josh Gordon and Wes Welker, and then you have Greg Hardy and Ray McDonald thrown into the mix and all the issues and the FBI investigating and the NFL is probably trying to recalibrate or hoping someday to recalibrate what they do and how they look at these off-field situations, considering also the societal factors that go on with certain parts of the country taking a switch to a kid.
We don't know.
We don't know. And so
I want to just insert here in the middle of this really quick that I asked Ian Rappaport what his belief was about the NFL, whether they would take action decisively and quickly or let the legal system play out. And he said the belief is that they will let the legal system play out, which means no disposition of this season.
Yeah, and an important point when you're looking at these situations from a fantasy standpoint, when you're weighing two guys who might get opportunities who have talent, choose the greater talent. So to me, it's like, is it McKinnon or Crowell? Long term, I'd pick Crowell. Even in a redraft, I'd pick Crowell over McKinnon because I think that long term, he probably will continue to see the field as opposed to someone like McKinnon who hasn't proven what Crowell has already.
Gene, a couple words of wisdom to folks as we get ready to take the field, week 2.
No wisdom, really. Just be patient. Go with upside where it's available. I think the one thing that I'm very interested in watching today is to see exactly what Andy Reid decides to do with his offense. How many more carries and touches is Jamal Charles going to get?
Travis Kelce.
Exactly. Is Travis Kelce going to be a bigger part of this offense? What happens with Dwayne Bowe back in the fold today? From an offensive perspective, obviously I'll be watching lots of defensive stuff and be on looking for injury information, but that's the most offensive pressing situation, I think, because it affects Jamal Charles. It affects one of the tight ends that we're hoping that steps up a little bit more. And I think it's got something for both Dwayne Bowe and Donnie Avery as well.
Free Brandon Graham.
Always. Please.
Free Brandon Graham. That's good. Hey, wow. That was, the Gene Bramwell needle almost went into the red there. That's good. That's good stuff, guys. It's good stuff every week. It's been quite a week to be a fan of the NFL. And I think we still continue with this theme that fantasy football is really about shared experience. It's really about community. It's really about human connections. And through all that, at least as always, what we aim for on Sundays is all that stuff kind of fades to the background and we get caught up in the games. So let's get caught up in the games for a little bit. We'll pick up all those conversations, including burning fantasy questions after Sunday. Thank you so much for joining us as always. Again, give me that feedback. Let me know what we can do with this show to help you the most. As always, appreciate the very valuable time, real estate of Gene and Matt on Sunday mornings here. And by the way, Matt's RSP Film Room Hangout series is underway. So look for that on Fridays when we're breaking down film. This is fun. It's a new age. And buckle your seatbelt. We'll see what goes down. Thanks, everybody. And as always, stay classy.